long careers are rarely defined by one moment of success. They are defined by how individuals respond to the expectations that follow. For Maureen McCormick, that expectation had a name the entire country recognized: Marsha Brady. For millions of Americans, she represented the perfect daughter, the bright center of television's most wholesome family. But the role that made her famous also created the central tension of her career, the challenge of living a real life while the public continued to see a character. This is not simply a story about television fame. It's a story about identity, reputation, and the long road of redefining yourself after the world believes it already knows who you are. If you've ever spent decades building a career of your own, this journey may feel surprisingly familiar. Let's take a closer look at how that story unfolded. The public image we just explored didn't appear overnight. It was built around a single professional breakthrough, one that arrived at exactly the moment American television was redefining what family entertainment looked like. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the television industry was in a period of transition. Networks were competing to capture the attention of a generation living through social change, cultural upheaval, and political tension. Amid that uncertainty, audiences gravitated toward programming that felt reassuring, shows that presented stability, humor, and the possibility that families could still function with warmth and patience. The Brady Bunch entered that environment with a concept that was quietly innovative for its time: a blended family navigating everyday life together. Divorce and remarriage were becoming more visible realities in American society, yet television rarely portrayed them in a way that felt optimistic. The show's format, 6 children, 2 parents, and a house full of ordinary domestic chaos, offered something audiences were ready for. At the center of that dynamic was the character of Marsha Brady. Played by Maureen McCormick, Marsha quickly emerged as the emotional and cultural focal point of the show. She was confident but approachable, admired by her siblings but still human enough to make mistakes. In an era when teenage characters were often written as rebellious or one-dimensional, Marsha Brady represented something different: a teenager who felt relatable to young viewers and reassuring to their parents. The performance resonated immediately. Even though the Brady Bunch did not dominate ratings during its original run, its cultural footprint grew steadily. Syndication, an increasingly powerful force in television economics, allowed the show to reach audiences repeatedly across the country. Families watched together after school and during early evening reruns. Over time, the characters became embedded in the collective memory of American television. For McCormick, this visibility changed everything. A young actress who had been working steadily in commercials and guest roles suddenly became associated with one of the most recognizable characters on television. The exposure was enormous. Marsha Brady was not just a role, she became a reference point. The character's personality, style, and catchphrases entered everyday conversation. And in the entertainment industry, that level of recognition carries consequences. Producers, casting directors, and network executives quickly began to see McCormick through the lens of that success. Her presence in a project immediately brought a specific expectation: warmth, familiarity, and the nostalgic comfort audiences associated with the Brady household. This was the moment success stopped being opportunity and started becoming expectation. That shift is one many professionals recognize, even outside entertainment. The first major success in a career often opens doors. But it also establishes a reputation that others begin to rely on. Suddenly, colleagues and decision-makers expect a certain kind of performance, a certain identity, a certain role within the system. In McCormick's case, the industry had discovered something valuable, a character that audiences trusted. But what makes a character powerful in the eyes of the public can also make it difficult for the performer to evolve beyond it. The more beloved Marsha Brady became, the more firmly that image attached itself to the actress who portrayed her. At the time, few people involved in the show could have predicted just how long that image would last. Television was still a relatively young medium, and the idea that a sitcom character could follow an actor for decades was not yet widely understood. But the breakthrough had already done its work. A television role had become a cultural identity. And in the years ahead, Maureen McCormick would discover that the real challenge of a long career wasn't achieving recognition, it was learning how to live with it. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when success creates pressures no one sees coming. The breakthrough that turned Maureen McCormick into a household name also introduced a new and far more complicated phase of her career. Once Marsha Brady became a cultural fixture, public perception of McCormick began to shift in a subtle but powerful way. She was no longer simply an actress playing a role. In the eyes of the audience, she had become the role itself. Television in the 1970s had an intimacy that modern media rarely replicates. Families watched together in living rooms every week, forming emotional connections with characters who felt like extended members of the household. Over time, viewers began to associate McCormick not just with the performance of Marsha Brady, but with the values that character represented: optimism, stability, and a kind of all-American innocence. That perception carried weight. As the show moved into syndication and continued to reach new audiences, Marsha Brady's image grew even more fixed in the cultural imagination. The character became shorthand for a certain type of American adolescence: confident, friendly, and idealized. And because television reruns repeated those same episodes year after year, the image never aged. For McCormick, however, life continued to move forward. The challenge was that the public image did not move with it. Instead, it remained frozen in time. The industry, responding to audience expectations, often approached her with roles that echoed the same familiar qualities. Producers understood that viewers recognized her instantly, but recognition came with a condition: they expected the comfort of the character they already knew. Fame had quietly reshaped her professional identity. The actress who once pursued opportunities across television now found herself carrying the weight of a single role that defined how decision-makers in Hollywood perceived her abilities. Casting directors often struggle to imagine an actor outside the framework that made them famous. When audiences love a character deeply, the industry becomes cautious about disrupting that relationship. Many Americans who built long careers understand this dynamic in their own professional lives. A reputation built over decades can become both a strength and a constraint. The qualities that made someone successful early in their career can eventually become the traits others insist on seeing forever. In entertainment, that tension is simply more visible. For McCormick, the pressure was not just about work opportunities. It was also about the expectations attached to the public image itself. Marsha Brady represented a polished version of family life that audiences found comforting. When viewers met the actress behind the character, they often expected to encounter the same personality they had welcomed into their homes for years. That kind of expectation can shape how a performer is perceived long after the cameras stop rolling. Many Americans who built long careers understand another aspect of this experience as well: the feeling that success sometimes locks you into a role you did not consciously choose. A teacher known for discipline, a manager known for calm leadership, a public figure known for reliability, these reputations develop over time, and they can become difficult to revise. McCormick's situation reflected that broader truth. Her early success had created a professional identity that felt stable to the public, but it also limited how others imagined her future. Yet this phase of pressure was not unusual in the television landscape of the time. Many actors associated with iconic series discovered that popularity came with long shadows. A character beloved by millions could follow a performer for decades, shaping not only career options but public expectations about who that person was supposed to be. The difference was how each actor responded. For McCormick, the years following her breakthrough became a period of adjustment, an attempt to navigate the space between the identity the public embraced and the individual she was still becoming. And that tension would soon force an important question: how do you build the next chapter of a career when the world is still holding on to the first? That's where the story turns next. The pressure created by public expectations eventually forced a strategic question that many professionals encounter at some point in their careers: how do you move forward when your past success defines how the world sees you? For Maureen McCormick, the answer was not a dramatic reinvention. Instead, it was a gradual process of repositioning, one that balanced practical realities with the need to protect her sense of professional identity. In Hollywood, actors who become strongly associated with a single character often face two choices. They can reject the image completely and attempt to distance themselves from it, or they can learn how to work with that recognition while slowly expanding beyond it. McCormick's strategy evolved toward the second path. Rather than disappearing from the industry in an attempt to escape the Brady legacy, she remained visible through a variety of projects that allowed her to stay connected to audiences while exploring different creative directions. Guest appearances on television programs, stage work, and music projects provided opportunities to build experience outside the narrow expectations that had followed her breakthrough. This approach reflected a deeper form of autonomy. Instead of allowing the industry's assumptions to determine the course of her career, McCormick began experimenting with the kinds of roles and performances that felt meaningful to her. That included returning to the stage, where theater allowed her to perform characters that audiences had not previously associated with her television image. The stage environment also offered something television often could not, the chance to connect with viewers in a more immediate and flexible way. For someone navigating a long career, this kind of adjustment is often less about chasing headlines and more about building durability. Strategic repositioning rarely happens overnight. It takes patience, persistence, and a willingness to redefine what success looks like at different stages of life. In McCormick's case, that repositioning included ventures beyond acting as well. Music projects, including a country album, reflected her interest in exploring a creative identity separate from the television character that had defined her early career. While not every project achieved major commercial success, each effort contributed to a broader professional narrative, one that demonstrated she was more than a single role. This kind of diversification is a familiar strategy across many professions. When individuals spend decades in one field, they often discover that maintaining relevance requires expanding the scope of their work. New skills, new formats, and new audiences can create opportunities that traditional career paths might not provide. For McCormick, the entertainment landscape itself was also changing. By the 1990s and early 2000s, television had begun to embrace nostalgia as a powerful cultural force. Reunion specials, reality programming, and retrospective projects offered performers from earlier decades a way to reconnect with audiences in a new context. Rather than resisting those opportunities, McCormick approached them with a more balanced perspective. Participating in projects that revisited the Brady legacy allowed her to acknowledge the role that had shaped her career while presenting herself as an experienced performer with a broader life story. This shift was significant because it reframed the narrative. Instead of appearing trapped by the past, she began to present that past as part of a larger journey. Audiences who had once seen her solely as Marsha Brady could now see an adult navigating the realities of a long professional life. That transformation is often the result of deliberate choices made over time. By maintaining visibility, exploring new forms of creative work, and gradually redefining how she engaged with her most famous role, McCormick positioned herself not simply as a former television star but as someone capable of adapting to a changing industry. In a career shaped by early recognition and intense expectations, that ability to reposition oneself became the foundation for staying relevant across multiple decades. Strategic adjustments in a career often begin with professional decisions, but over time they lead to something deeper, a personal recalibration of how success is defined. For Maureen McCormick, the later stages of her career reflected this quieter transformation. After years spent navigating expectations tied to a single iconic role, the challenge gradually shifted from proving she could escape that identity to deciding how she wanted to live with it. By the time television nostalgia began gaining momentum in the 1990s and 2000s, McCormick was no longer the young performer trying to distance herself from Marsha Brady. Instead, she had entered a phase of life familiar to many professionals who have spent decades in their fields, the period when experience replaces urgency and perspective reshapes ambition. Aging in the public eye carries its own unique pressures. Audiences remember performers at a particular moment in time, often preserving that image long after the individual has moved forward in life. For television actors especially, reruns can freeze a character at the peak of youth while the real person continues to grow, evolve, and change. McCormick's later appearances on television revealed a different approach to this reality. Rather than attempting to compete with the image audiences remembered from earlier decades, she leaned into authenticity. Reality television programs, retrospective specials, and reunion projects allowed viewers to see her not as the teenager they once knew, but as an adult reflecting on a long and complicated career. This shift represented a recalibration of public identity. Earlier in her career, the goal had often been to separate herself from the character that had defined her success. Later, the emphasis became integration, acknowledging that Marsha Brady was part of her professional story while demonstrating that her life extended far beyond that single role. For viewers who have spent 20 or 30 years building their own careers, this transition can feel familiar. Early in professional life, success is often measured by rapid advancement or visible achievements. Over time, however, many people discover that longevity requires a different kind of metric: stability, adaptability, and the ability to remain meaningful in a changing environment. McCormick's later career reflected that kind of evolution. Participating in projects that celebrated television history allowed her to reconnect with audiences who had grown up watching her. Shows centered on nostalgia, such as cast reunions and home renovation projects tied to the Brady Bunch legacy, offered opportunities to revisit the past while presenting it through the lens of experience. These appearances also revealed something important about sustaining relevance across decades. In many industries, staying visible requires embracing the narrative that audiences already recognize. By acknowledging the cultural significance of the Brady Bunch, McCormick allowed viewers to revisit memories of the show while also introducing them to the person she had become. In this sense, the recalibration was both personal and strategic. She no longer needed to prove she could escape her most famous role. Instead, she demonstrated that a career could grow beyond its original definition without erasing it. The public image that once felt restrictive gradually became a bridge, connecting different phases of her life and career. For audiences who have lived through their own professional reinventions, that arc carries an important message. Careers rarely follow the clean, upward trajectory people imagine when they begin. They unfold in stages, each requiring a different kind of adaptation. McCormick's later years illustrate what happens when an individual stops fighting the past and begins incorporating it into a broader understanding of success. The result is not a reinvention in the dramatic sense, but something more sustainable, a long career shaped by resilience, perspective, and a willingness to redefine what fulfillment looks like as time moves forward. Careers that last for decades rarely follow the neat trajectory people imagine when success first arrives. They expand, contract, redirect, and sometimes force individuals to rethink what success actually means. The story of Maureen McCormick illustrates that truth in a way that feels especially familiar to anyone who has spent a large part of their life building a professional identity. At first glance, her career appears defined by a single cultural moment. One television role became deeply embedded in American pop culture, shaping how audiences recognized her for generations. But the more meaningful story is not about the moment of fame itself. It is about what happens afterward, how a person learns to manage success once it becomes larger than the individual who achieved it. Managing success is often harder than achieving it. Early recognition can create expectations that last far longer than the circumstances that produced them. In many professions, the accomplishment that first opens doors can also create a reputation that others expect you to maintain indefinitely. For performers, the effect is especially visible. Audiences remember the character, the role, or the moment that first captured their attention, and that memory becomes part of the performer's identity whether they choose it or not. McCormick's experience reflects a broader lesson about long careers. Success can create both opportunity and constraint. The key is learning how to navigate that tension without losing a sense of self. Protecting personal autonomy becomes essential in that process. Over time, individuals must decide how much of their public identity they are willing to let others define. Some choose to reject their past accomplishments in search of reinvention. Others attempt to preserve the image that made them successful in the first place. The more sustainable path often lies somewhere in between, acknowledging the past while still allowing room for growth. What stands out in McCormick's story is the gradual recognition that a career does not need to be separated from its most famous chapter in order to evolve. Instead of permanently distancing herself from the role that introduced her to audiences, she eventually learned to integrate that legacy into a broader narrative. By doing so, she demonstrated that identity can expand rather than replace what came before. This approach also reveals something about sustaining relevance over long periods of time. In many fields, relevance is not simply about staying visible or achieving constant reinvention. It often depends on authenticity. Audiences, colleagues, and communities tend to respond to individuals who acknowledge their experiences honestly and allow their professional lives to reflect the passage of time. For viewers who have spent 20 or 30 years in their own careers, that idea resonates strongly. Life rarely unfolds according to the plans we make in our 20s. Roles change. Responsibilities grow. Expectations evolve. What begins as ambition often becomes something more reflective, a desire to maintain purpose while adapting to new realities. In that sense, the arc of McCormick's career reveals a deeper insight about longevity. Long careers are not sustained by one defining moment but by the ability to reinterpret that moment as life moves forward. Success becomes less about preserving a particular image and more about understanding how each chapter contributes to the larger story. And perhaps that is the most meaningful lesson here. The identities we build early in life may shape us, but they do not have to confine us. With time, perspective, and resilience, individuals can learn to carry their past achievements without allowing them to dictate the future. For those of you who have watched your own careers evolve across decades, this story may feel familiar in unexpected ways. What moments defined your professional identity? And how did you navigate the expectations that followed? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how your own journey compares. And if this reflection resonated with you, stay with us as we continue exploring the stories behind other remarkable long careers.